All right, why don't we get kicked off and let people join in. But morning, my name is Keenan Miller, and I am the Assistant Director for Public Engagement at the MTC. And we wanted to start this meeting off providing the Regional Equity Working Group a brief update on the equity platform as we head into 2021 and the next and final phases for Plan Bay Area 2050. Our agency has not been immune to the disruptive impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic and the related economic headwinds and budget adjustments that all public agencies are facing during this difficult chapter. And while 2020 has not proceeded as any of us expected, our agency, under Executive Director Therese McMillan's leadership, has maintained a steadfast commitment to advancing equity under the equity platform. As a quick refresher, and for those of you who may not be familiar with the equity platform, I'm going to briefly summarize the platform with a look at some of the specific issues we're focusing on at MTC. As a leaping off point, it's always helpful to make plain what we mean.
Sorry to interrupt. Your slide is not fully blown up across the screen.
Okay.
We see all your notes, so I think it'd be easier if it's the other way around.
Oh, okay. How does that look?
Yes, perfect.
Thanks, Anoop. Yeah, so as you may recall, the equity platform is built on 4 pillars adopted from the model Executive Director McMillan implemented at LA Metro. And the equity platform is designed to apply 360 degrees throughout our agency, looking inward and outward as a lens to illuminate every aspect of MTC's programs and practices and policies. Define and measure is about highlighting that measuring success depends on having the right data. In other words, if you can't measure it, you can't improve it. This is about creating a baseline to measure progress, building off the equity indicators developed under Vital Signs and in previous incarnations of Plan Bay Area, and even introducing new data sources where they can help to measure success. One of the ways this pillar of the equity platform has come to life has been with the definition of the term communities of concern. Adopting the equity platform has spurred discussion of how we define communities of concern, what criteria are weighed, and even whether the term itself requires updating to more accurately and thoughtfully reflect the neighborhoods, households, and people who live in so-called communities of concern. My colleague Anoop will be delving further into that particular discussion later this morning. Listen and Learn, the second platform, is a pillar that my public engagement team is devoted to doing. The key question this platform asks of us is who's missing from the table, noting the historical disparity between who's able to show up and weigh in on public decisions versus who gets typically left out, and how low income, limited English proficient, people with disabilities, people of color, young people, and working families are less represented. An equitable approach to community engagement requires investing more resources to provide meaningful access for such underrepresented groups. In short, the people closest to the pain should be making the policy. We see investing in partnerships with trusted community-based organizations as key to this equity platform pillar. Focus and deliver, this pillar is about where the rubber meets the proverbial road. Where can we shift discretionary programmatic investments to better advance equity outcomes and move away from practices that exacerbate disparities in opportunity? How does bus rapid transit compare with rail versus maintaining and operating our system? Bringing the equity platform here really focuses on the questions of who benefits and who's burdened. And finally, this fourth pillar, train and grow, recognizes that our agency's most critical resource, professional staff, come to the job with different levels of familiarity and sophistication in advancing an equity agenda. Providing robust staff training, conducting equity audits, evaluating our data collection, measurement, and analysis approaches, these are all crucial components to instilling top to bottom ownership of the equity platform throughout the agency. You all may recognize this graphic, which was designed by my colleague Judith Santos. It's what we call the equity infinity loop. It's meant to capture the notion that equity is a process and not an outcome, that it requires continuous implementation, recalibration, and adjustments as the world around us evolves. The twin whirlpools are centered around the equity platform on the left, meaning the internal mechanics that we control to advance equity, balanced with the equity metrics on the right, the soft and hard data that independently exists and illuminates how we are progressing and where our growth and blind spots are. Crucially, we look to other metropolitan planning organizations and public jurisdictions around the country and indeed globally to see what metrics have proven helpful for tracking equity advancement. Now, so much has happened in the past week, let alone in 2020. Having the equity platform in place and with dozens of staff members who had gone through racial equity trainings already equipped our agency with the tools to respond more effectively. 6 months ago, in the aftermath of the murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Ahmaud Arbery, and Sean Monterosa here in Vallejo, MTC came out with a strong statement acknowledging the historic role local governments and the planning profession have played in systematically denying opportunities to Black people. This summer of racial reckoning led to significant shifts across institutions nationwide, managing to say explicitly that Black Lives Matter. And there was a surge of demand for equity, diversity, and inclusion consultants to help employers come and do the work of dismantling structural racism. And this leads us to my final slide. After a summer of belt tightening and addressing perhaps the biggest existential threat to Bay Area transit agencies in our history, with the precipitous drop in ridership due to shelter in place, MTC is endeavoring to build up a bench of equity consultants who can be brought in on a range of expertise areas currently outlined under these 5 buckets of internal operations, investments and policy, community and partner engagement, innovation, and environmental justice. So the RFQ is meant to be broad enough to bring in a wide range of outside expertise and is due to be released soon as it makes its way through our contracting department. RUG members will be among the first to know about the RFQ, and we really welcome your ideas on who to share this with, and even and especially your own responses to the RFQ, since RUG members have been focused on the project of advancing a more equitable MTC and a more equitable Bay Area for several cycles of Plan Bay Area. So with that, I'll do my best to answer any questions you may have, either live or in the QA box, and hand it over to my colleagues. Ursula might have a brief statement before Anoop takes over.
No, I just wanted to outline that if you have a question for Keenom and the equity platform, please type it in the Q&A box now, or you can raise your hand, use the raise hand function at the bottom of the screen, and you can ask the question live. Anoop will begin in a second, and there will be an opportunity for questions and comments. So seeing none, we'll turn it over to you, Anoop.
Thank you, Ursula. Thank you, Keenom. Good morning, everyone. It's nice to be with you all again, despite being behind computer screens. I missed you all during the last Regional Equity Working Group meeting, which was a workshop on Plan Bay Area's final blueprint strategies, as I had to take some emergency leave. Again, my name is Anoop Tapase. I'm a planner at MTC ABAG. I'm leading the equity analysis for Plan Bay Area 2050. I'm joined, of course, by Keenom and Ursula, as well as Dave Paughton, Plan Bay Area 2050 project manager. So I believe we have about 50 people on the call today. And today I would like to give you all an update on the equity analysis for the plan. While we are not quite sharing the forecasted final blueprint outcomes or the equity analysis for the plan itself yet, that will be shared later in the year and early next year. Today I am sharing an update on the components that will feed into the equity analysis. So please bear with me and ask if this presentation seems a little disjoint. So let's start with the agenda on page 2. Next slide, please, Ursula. First, I want to provide a quick recap of our progress so far. Then the majority of the presentation is the second item, which is an update on the communities of concern, which also has some attachments in the email that was sent out last week. I hope you've had a chance to review. After this, we will pause for clarifying questions and also an open discussion where you will be able to speak. Next, I will go over the framework we will use for the equity analysis report and then wrap up with next steps and more discussion. So while we do have these pauses for questions, as Ursula mentioned, please feel free to type in your questions in the Q&A function of Zoom at any point in time, and then we will pick them up when we break for questions. Okay, next slide, please. Thank you. Recapping our progress so far, we have collaborated with this working group since September of last year. We kicked off in fall 2019 with a discussion of existing inequities and issues that we should be prioritizing to address in the plan. In the winter, we reviewed outputs from Horizon, which was the precursor to Plan Bay Area 2050, which helped inform the plan strategies. We refined these strategies together to make them more equity and justice oriented in both December and January, and our boards approved the draft blueprint for study, which was the very first iteration of Plan Bay Area 2050. In January, we also talked through the desired outcomes of the plan with respect to the plan's guiding principles, which informed how we measured plan outcomes. We engaged with underserved communities through focus groups in April, and then in summer, later than we originally had planned due to delays, we reviewed the outcomes of the draft blueprint. In July, we had a workshop to refine those strategies further for the final blueprint based on those outcomes from the draft blueprint. And now we are engaged in analyzing the final blueprint. And so we hope to release outcomes of the final blueprint next month in December. Next slide, please. Sorry, I'm just checking my Slack to make sure we don't have any issues. Okay. So we are on, yes, that slide. So we had proposed quite early on to this group that in this plan, we want to build on work from past planning efforts and not start from scratch. So we are taking advantage of our collaboration in the last two plan cycles. First, the Communities of Concern framework, which was updated with an improved definition and revised methodology during Plan Bay Area 2040, which is our last regional plan. And second, the equity measures to determine plan outcomes. We did substantial work with this group to determine what those metrics would be, and that formed the basis for the metrics we are using this cycle, although we have quite expanded on them quite a bit. Next slide, please. So this, using this work from the last two planned areas has really allowed us to refocus our time and efforts in this plan by using an equity lens approach and weaving equity into the strategies. Apart from engaging with you all to refine the strategies multiple times, we sought commitments from transportation project sponsors to advance equitable strategies, and also managed to engage with underserved communities during the blueprint process to identify needs, especially in light of COVID, and develop new strategies for the final blueprint. For the next few months now, we will focus our efforts on analyzing the disparities in outcomes of the final blueprint and developing the equity analysis report for Plan Bay Area 2050 for release in spring 2020. So these are all the key pieces of work that will help us craft the equity analysis report. We had the equity analysis from the transportation project performance. This was completed in February. Then we had the investment analysis and outcomes analysis from the draft blueprint. We have locked in the strategies that were approved by our boards. And today we are sharing the Communities of Concern update, which will feed into the equity analysis. This will be the basis for measuring disparities. And then in the next couple of months, we will have the analysis on the final blueprint complete as well. Moving into the major part of today's presentation is the update on Communities of Concern. First, a quick recap on Communities of Concern. Most of you might be familiar, but Communities of Concern are designated geographies, or more specifically census tracts, that have high concentrations of underserved populations based on predetermined thresholds for 8 disadvantaged factors. So the factors are in the next slide. I will come to that, but there are 2 definitions based on the concentration of these 8 disadvantaged factors. And this was refined during Plan Bay Area 2040. Definition 1 is that census tracts that have a high concentration of people of color and people with low income. And the second definition was census tracts that have a high concentration of any 3 of the remaining 6 factors, if also a concentration of people with low income. So we had proposed for Plan Bay Area 2050 that we would retain these definitions, but refresh the underlying data, while acknowledging that longer-term refinements are needed for this methodology. So the update using the most recent ACS data along with the full technical documentation and map layers, have been uploaded online. There are links on the slide to the right, and there are maps in your attachments as well. Next page, please. So before getting further into that data update, I wanted to remind you all on how we use communities of concern. So within Plan Bay Area, we use it for equity analysis of plan outcomes. We use it for the project performance, for the transportation project performance, and we will use it for the federally required EJ analysis as well. Further, some of our strategies propose investments or prioritization of investments in these communities. Apart from Plan Bay Area, it is also used to prioritize funding in various programs or used as a criteria for funding, such as in the Active Transportation Program and Bike Share Equity Program and Lifeline Transportation Program. It's also used in other equity analyses in different plans, such as the Transportation Improvement Program. Beyond MTC and ABAG, this framework is used by other Bay Area transit agencies as well, and other county transportation authorities for their equity analysis, as well as prioritizing funding in some programs, such as county-administered community-based transportation plan grants. So for this presentation, while we are talking about the update to communities of concern, it is specific to Plan Bay Area 2050 for now. Okay, so back to the impact of the data update with the most recent ACS data. You may be familiar with this table. This is where we calculate the concentration thresholds for the 8 disadvantage factors that you see in the first column. The first step of 2 is to determine the share of Bay Area population for each of these 8 factors. So the first column with numbers is the share calculated during Plan Bay Area 2040, and the next column shows the calculation with the most recent data in Plan Bay Area 2050. The biggest change you will see is the second row, people with low income, that is below 200% federal poverty level. And that share of people with low income in the region has decreased from 25% to 21%. Share of people of color has grown by 2%, and the rest of the factors have remained fairly consistent within 1 percentage point since the last plan. The second step is where we calculate the concentration thresholds, which is a math exercise. It is calculated as the Bay Area mean plus half a standard deviation across the census tracts. So the way we designated the tracts in Plan Bay Area 2040, if a tract has 70% share of persons of color and a 30% share of population with low income, then the tract is designated as a CoC. The other definition, the second definition, was that if a tract has 30% share of population with low income and also concentration of any 3 of the 6 remaining factors, then that tract is designated as a communities of concern. In Plan Bay Area 2050, we're keeping those same definitions, but now we're using these updated thresholds. As you can see in the last column, most of these thresholds have decreased. So if the concentrations of underserved populations at the census tract level have remained similar to the last plan cycle, then more census tracts should be designated as communities of concern since these concentration thresholds are lower. However, this was not the case. We can go to the next slide, please. There have been 3 main shifts in the communities of concern, which are all very interrelated and validate known demographic trends that I'm sure are not going to be surprising to you. The total number of designated tracts has declined from 365 to 339, driven by a reduction in the share of households with income below 200% of the federal poverty level, as I pointed out in the previous slide. Second, the share of population experiencing disadvantages within the communities of concern tracts has mostly declined, indicating lower geographic concentration of disadvantage. And third, shifts in locations of the communities of concern tracts are indicative of displacement trends and align with research in the Bay Area. So I have a slide for each of these trends. First, the decrease in the number of tracts designated as communities of concern. This chart compares the number of tracts between Plan Bay Area 2040 and Plan Bay Area 2050 by definition that is used to designate them as CoCs. As you can see here, and this is explained further in one of the attachments, the decrease is driven by definition 1, which is predominantly due to a lower share of households above the low-income threshold. Now, some of the obvious reasons why this might be happening are displacement and gentrification, but also the region's overall share is declining. And we know there is net migration of lower income households out of the Bay Area, but also recent municipal minimum wage increases that may put more people above the 200% federal poverty line. Next slide, please. Second, this table shows the share of underserved population that lives within the designated communities of concern tracts. As you can see, this has decreased across most disadvantaged factors, with the steepest decline being for people of color, which means less people of color a lower share of people of color within the Bay Area live within the newly designated communities of concern. Overall, only 21% of underserved population now lives with these newly designated communities of concern, indicating that these populations are more spread out over the region. And so I know this group has pointed this issue in the past, even in Plan Bay Area 2040, so it's not a surprise, but this trend of lower geographic concentration of disadvantage continues. Third, shifts in location of the tracts are, next slide, thank you. Shifts in the location of tracts are representative of displacement trends. Alameda and Santa Clara counties have the biggest shifts. For example, in Alameda, several tracts are no longer designated communities of concern in Union City, Hayward, and Oakland as well. New communities of concern tracts emerged in West Berkeley and Southeast Emeryville. In Santa Clara County, San Jose saw large decreases, particularly in the eastern part of the city, and new communities of concern tracts emerged in Sunnyvale. Now, again, this does not mean that all these tracts had displacement, but it's also possible that many of these tracts had a lot of infill development or gentrification, and so the share or the concentration of underserved households decreases in these tracts. So I won't go into every single county, but there's more details in the attachments. Next slide, please. So given such trends, and as many of you and other equity advocates have rightly pointed out in the past, there definitely is a need to re-examine this communities of concern framework. We recognize that this has been a methodology we have used for a long time and may be dated. There are lots of questions we need to be asking. Smaller questions like, should we be adjusting the definitions of low income in the Bay Area? Or how can the methodology capture displaced populations and or populations at risk of displacement? But also larger questions like, are we overemphasizing concentrated poverty? And are we truly advancing equity by using such a deficit-based narrative and problematizing the disadvantage? Place is obviously an important dimension of equity, but we realize we need to reflect on how we frame this discussion. And we need to engage more closely with you all, and more importantly, communities in the near future to discuss things like how we can take into account effects of historical injustices more directly, or how this framework should take into account the other side of this coin, that is concentrated affluence. So such discussion we know will take time and will not be feasible within the planned timeline. So this is an effort we hope to undertake later in 2021 or 2022 as part of the Equity Platform Initiative. The Met Council in Minneapolis has been engaged in an extensive study on this issue and has reflected quite well on the concept of opportunity and various other things. I put up some quotes on the slide, even though I know I'm preaching to the choir here, but these are things we need to ponder over in the future on how we should be characterizing these communities and be more thoughtful in our analyses. So before getting into the next slide, I want to take a quick, we can go to the next slide. Before getting into the slide after this, I want to take a quick pause here for a poll question. You should shortly see a poll question pop up on your Zoom. Please go ahead and submit the answer anytime, and here's the question. So we have identified underserved communities as communities of concern for over 2 decades now. Do you feel this terminology itself, that is the term communities of concern, appropriately captures the significance of these communities? So we'll give it a few more seconds. We are seeing the 38% disagree, 34% neutral, Now it's at 36% between disagree and neutral, 12% strongly disagree, and 17% agree. So most people are at disagree and neutral, some at strongly disagree and agree, no one at strongly agree. Okay, we can move forward. Thank you for that. We can move to next. Thank you. And you can close the poll window if it still appears on your screen. So we deliberated internally on this and acknowledged the power of language, and we recognize that the current terminology, communities of concern, may be perceived as paternalistic, evoke empathy, conjure negative perceptions, and many of us internally take issue with this nomenclature. So we are proposing to change it immediately for this plan cycle, even prior to addressing the overall framework itself. Various MPOs and other public agencies use terminology that is more descriptive, more action-oriented. On the right, there are some examples used by other agencies, generally falling into three typologies. One is just calling something related to environmental justice, which is easily understood, like EJ areas or communities, but it's a limited definition. Second is using the word disadvantage, which emphasizes the disadvantage, like areas of concentrated poverty or historically marginalized communities, but again, might feed into a deficit-based narrative. And finally, something related to the word equity, which is holistic and inclusive, but maybe vague as well. Next slide, please. So some of us deliberated internally and came up with a few suggestions to start the conversation. By no means are we saying that these are our four alternatives for the names. We felt that we want to highlight the opportunity and prioritization of these communities for investments. And so some names that we came up with, which may or may not be in order of priority, are equity prioritized opportunity communities, equity prioritized investment communities, equity focused communities, and equity and access zones. And of course, we don't really want to create more acronyms here, but we also want to do the right thing. And we think that is changing the terminology for use in this plan. So here are the next steps we are proposing. And after this, we'll pause for questions and discussion. In the near term, within this plan cycle, given the shortcomings of the framework, like we discussed, we will augment this methodology for the equity analysis. We will measure disparities not only for communities concerned in the rest of the region, but also high resource areas. And also we'll measure disparities based on income status where feasible and appropriate, given such a large share of population lives outside, low-income population lives outside communities of concern. Unfortunately, we're not able to show those kind of disaggregate disparities based on a person of color or some other disadvantages, just because how we do not forecast our model outputs using those variables. And within the plan barrier cycle as well, we want to revise the nomenclature. We are seeking your opinions today or by email. We're also engaging with community focus groups in January. And we will take the feedback from all stakeholders and propose some nomenclature for use in the plan document in February 2021. Longer term, we will look to re-examine the methodology, the whole framework of communities of concern, as part of the equity platform in 2021 or beyond. We would like to engage with the community, advocates, you all, partner agencies as well, and survey communities better to identify needs and values, and also research tools and methodologies to forecast disaggregate impacts on the basis of race and ethnicity. So that's the update on communities of concern. I want to pause first and see if we have any clarifying questions, Ursula.
Yes, we do.
Yes, we have one question and then a brief comment. First question, will the CTAs be able to adjust communities of concern, or however it's renamed, in their counties as they were in previous cycles? And if so, what timeline should CTAs be working under?
So we are, as I said, we have released the updated layers and methodology on our website. I am not familiar how CTAs have adapted this in the past. Maybe Dave can provide some context, but since all that is fully available online and you are ready to, you should feel ready to work with it starting like early next year for your purposes.
Hi, good morning, everyone.
And, obviously, we're here to answer any questions.
This is Dave Vaughton. I'll jump in on that question as it's a good one. For the purposes of the Plan Bay Area 2050 analysis, as we noted, we updated it with the latest data, and we will be proceeding with analysis as is. But you are correct that CTAs for purposes of local planning have, often built upon that framework of communities of concern and integrated local knowledge. So as Anoop mentioned, you can access the data, take a look at it, and consider what you might want to, how you might want to proceed in 2021 on that front. But for the purposes of Plan Bay Area 2050, we do use the regional map of CoCs under kind of a consistent regional definition. And as Anoop mentioned, longer term in 2021, 2022, we do plan on considering a whole new framework for identifying, people, communities that are in need of these critical investments. So this would be a kind of a little bit longer term project to reinvent that, and we would love to have the CTAs and other stakeholders involved in that process. So that's something to keep in mind before you go ahead and start thinking about local tweaks to the communities of concern that we'll be using for Plan Bay Area 2050, is that in the next few years we may redesign the whole geographic framework. So just something to keep in mind.
Okay, thanks, Dave and Anoop. Anoop, one more comment about the naming opinion you asked for earlier. I guess the Oakland DOT uses priority neighborhoods and areas. Okay, one more question. Given the displacement of communities of concern to more affordable areas such as the northern San Joaquin Valley, how will MTC prioritize interregional transit investments that provide access to jobs for COCs in Plan Bay Area 2050?
Thank you, David, for the question. So as you know, the Plan Bay Area 2050, just like all RTPs, is supposed to be for the 9-county Bay Area. However, we do recognize the need for interregional transit investments, and hence this plan does include the one of the projects in the transportation project list as part of the growing a regional rail strategy is the Valley Link project that connects the San Joaquin Valley to the Bay Area. I believe also there is some transit investments to increase service on the ACE regional line as well.
And if I may, I think this question actually gets to the core of what Anoop was speaking about, in the, not just considering the naming of communities of concern, but actually the framework of communities of concern. So let's take that ACE investment that is included in the plan and just talk about it for a second. That's an example of a project that does serve communities of concern, right? Including areas outside our region that have large numbers of lower income and communities of color as well. But just because a project runs through those places or even has a station in them doesn't mean that the project is addressing the preponderance of needs of those communities. And so as we did our project performance assessment for projects in Plan Bay Area 2050, what we often saw are projects that ran through communities of concern, but were not being heavily utilized by them. And in fact, the ACE system, no system in the Bay Area has riders that are wealthier than riders on board ACE. So it's an example of a project that really today is serving a higher income demographic, even as it serves lower income and communities of color. So that really speaks to the fact that there may be a need to move on from the geographic approach or significantly refine that geographic approach after the adoption of Plan Bay Area 2050 as we think about how to prioritize investments that truly meet the needs of low-income communities, minority communities across the Bay Area and beyond, truly meeting those needs with the right type of investments.
Okay, thank you, David and Anoop. Another question from Matt. Does SB 375 encourage or discourage interregional commuting? Some people who work in the 9 counties, should some people who work in the 9 counties be able to live in the 9 counties?
So SB 375 requires us to provide sufficient housing in our plan so that way there isn't further growth in interregional commuting. But I would note that it does not say that that current commuters must be rehoused into the Bay Area. And so that's why investments in interregional systems like Capital Corridor, like Valley Link and ACE, that's why these investments are important, because there are, thousands, tens of thousands of folks crossing into the Bay Area today, who need better transportation options, greener transportation options to get where they need to go. And so as we work to address our housing crisis by making sure we're not making a bad situation worse, our plans do need to consider how to provide more transportation alternatives to folks who are doing that sort of thing today.
Okay, great. Anoop, those are all of our clarifying questions.
Thank you. Okay, so we would really like to hear directly from you. Do you all have thoughts to share on what you think about our presentation, but more specifically, what do you think about the communities of concern framework shortcomings that we shared with you, and what we can do in the short term within the plan to measure disparities? Or do you have thoughts or suggestions for the nomenclature? And while we're not going to address how to overhaul the framework, the communities of concern framework on this call, we are happy to hear some thoughts on the future reexamination as well. I know this is hard on the Zoom call, but please raise your hand and we will do our best to call you in order. I think we have sufficient time. We have about 20 or 30 minutes or so to give us sufficient time for the last item on the presentation as well.
Yeah, great. So, and just to remind you, if you feel more comfortable, I can read your question in the Q&A box, which I think some people do, Anoop. So we're going to start with the raised hands. Oh, I guess it's been moved to the Q&A. So I'll start with the Q&A box, Anoop. The first comment, it would be helpful to get more guidance on the CTA's adjustments. Our understanding is that the CTAs were able to adjust the regional map for use in applications for regional funding programs. For example, it sounds like it is a policy change. Last cycle, this was a priority for MTC commissioners. Thank you.
So let me address that one. I think it's good feedback. Right now, the 2020 CoCs are only being used in Plan Bay Area 2050, but I think we acknowledge the concern and question about future funding programs, and that's something that we can, as we move into 2021, think about. We also want that policymaker input, though, on any larger scale reforms of communities of concern, especially if we're moving away from a geographic approach or considering alternative approaches. We would want to have that sort of engagement. And that is the very reason why the discussion today, or at least in the Plan Bay Area 2050 process, is focused more on the minor data updates to what we have in place already, potentially some changes to the nomenclature, because we know it might be a 1 or 2 year process to do a more comprehensive update to the communities of concern methodology.
Great. Okay, next comment from Pat. Just a thought, maybe a single term is not the solution. I don't have an answer, just seems that the terms so far raise more questions than they seem to solve. And I think that means the naming nomenclature. But we encourage you to raise your hand and give any comments, anything that Anoop or Dave have said, anything on the communities of concern, anything on measuring disparities in Plan Bay Area 2050. We want to hear your comments. That's why we're here.
I'm sure if we were in person, there would be a lot more comments.
It's true.
But I mean, please feel free to just raise your hand and share any thoughts. And it doesn't need to be like a question or a suggestion, but we would appreciate any thoughts.
So Janet, we have a few in the Q&A box, Anoop. Janet says we need to address rural poverty. And then Derek is asking, would MTC consider working with the CTAs in a self-nomination process with local community-based organizations? The transformative project process received a lot of input from nonprofits, and this model could be considered with coordination from the CTAs. Any comments on that, Dave or Anoop?
Derek, I think
Sure.
that's a interesting idea that, you know, especially if we're, you know, like talking about that longer term phase of more of a methodology overhaul. I think it's something that, you know, if we are moving away from the, say, the current methodology to a new framework, that's something that we could consider. Regardless, I think we want to get community-based organizations more closely engaged if we're going to do more of a comprehensive update, because we recognize that, as was noted by some of the other folks on the call today, that that these CoCs, you know, while this update is really just for Plan Bay Area 2050, that they're being used for a lot of other programs and projects nowadays. So, you know, we need to take the time to get the buy-in for a more comprehensive update if that's the direction that the commission and others want to go.
Okay, I saw someone had their hand up and then they put it down, so don't be shy. I'll keep going with the Q&A box. Kristen says, I agree that the CoC nomenclature needs to be revisited. Appreciate this change. Kristen, I encourage you to give us some suggestions. Thank you very much. Pat asks, have you reviewed the recent New Jersey EJ statute? The recent trend seems to be putting more emphasis on the environmental issues rather than just poverty. Anoop or Dave?
No, I have not taken a look at that, but thank you for pointing it out. I will. Please feel free to elaborate on it.
Okay. Next from Emily, think the idea of moving beyond specific place-based definitions makes sense, but difficult to see how implementation may work, given the breadth of stakeholders would like to see some suggestions. Oh, given the breadth of stakeholders, they would like to see some suggestions.
For sure. I think this is going to be a longer process where we will engage significantly.
Okay, and Rich asked if this is being recorded today, and by golly, yes it is. And it will be up on the Plan Bay Area website, as per usual. Okay, any other questions? Oh, here we go. For state funding programs, regional definitions of disadvantaged communities are important. So it will be important to maintain some type of equity-focused geographies.
So certainly, by no means are we suggesting that in the long term we should take out this definition of any definition of some geographies, because equity is obviously a very important issue and like on the basis of place. I think the question we're trying to pose, or what we're trying to suggest, is how we frame this discussion on place. And how do we recognize that these places are not places where there are problems, but places where we need to focus investments, and how do we best determine those places with constantly or rapidly changing demographics?
Okay, thank you. Next question from Jane. What are your thoughts on the use of Callan virus screen as a method for identifying CoCs, as these combine socioeconomic and environmental vulnerability? CARB funding is tied to these definitions and have thresholds, 25% most vulnerable.
I'll take this one, and Anoop, if you want to jump in as well. I know a number of stakeholders in the Bay Area have had significant concerns with use of Callan virus screen, in part because it doesn't pick up a lot of our vulnerable communities across the region. And you know, the communities of concern framework has done historically a better job at reflecting those areas, simply because, you know, it's focused in on the, you know, regional characteristics here in the Bay Area. So I think we continue to advocate for ongoing reforms to CalEnviroScreen on the state level. I'm not sure until those reforms are made whether that tool would be you know, the most well aligned with the needs of the region.
Okay. Okay. Comment from Kate. I think the nomenclature should use language that MTC is specifically addressing regarding the problem solving for prioritizing for populations of people where resources and policy and planning solutions are most needed. I think terminology regarding justice can be broadly interpreted and that more specific language would be best.
Thank you, Kate.
Question, can you share the reforms you are advocating for in regards to CalEnviroScreen?
Well, again, Anoop, if you want to jump in here, you're welcome to. I'm no CalEnviroScreen expert, but my understanding is if you actually look at the map of CalEnviroScreen for the Bay Area, you'll notice that some communities that I think we would all agree are lower income or minority places that you know, have been historically underinvested in don't pop out in the map. And my understanding is that it's because of CalEnviroScreen's overlay of environmental factors with equity factors. And since the Bay Area, compared to the rest of the state, tends to have cleaner air, fewer, you know, industrial facilities, other sorts of, you know, environmentally concerning locations or facilities compared to the Central Valley, compared to Southern California, that simply there are just fewer areas identified in CalEnviroScreen as places. And I know some of the reforms or suggestions that have been put forward over the years have been basically about allowing more regional flexibility to reflect that there are communities in the Bay Area that are important for these types of investments. And just because generally our environmental conditions are somewhat better here in the Bay Area doesn't mean that those communities should be precluded from accessing those state funds or being competitive for those state funds.
Okay.
I mean, we do use some classification from CalEnviroScreen for our EIR and for our equity analysis when it comes to specific metrics regarding the environment, such as air pollutants. But yes, I would echo Dave's comments there on with regards to social equity.
Okay, thanks, Anoop. Sorry I interrupted you there. We do have a hand up, so Rich, please go ahead.
Good morning. It's been a question burning in my mind for years, and how we deal with communities of concern, especially in poverty, when the incomes they earn here would show them a pretty decent life in middle Western cities, and especially in rural towns. Groceries are 20% higher here than they are in the Midwest. Fuel is higher, and my God, rent. And those are the three basic items that low-income people spend their funds on. How do we ever get around that? That's simply a question thrown out there to sort of raise realization that it's very, very difficult. And I applaud you for working on it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rich. I think, yeah, so right now we use the 200% of federal poverty level. And again, we also recognize how that threshold is probably different for different counties or different parts of counties. Yeah, these are all certainly issues we need to think about in the future.
Okay, thank you. We have a comment. Future definitions, methodologies, etc., may need to respond to issues with 2020 census data due to this year's collection process. And then, yeah. And then a question, how do we we, all included, engage with communities to determine how they want to define equity populations, communities of concern, priority population, etc. For example, thinking about how they would define themselves based upon their needs, transportation, housing.
Right. So we are planning on engaging with focus groups through community-based organizations in January. We are doing this along with our outreach for the implementation plan. And I think these are the kind of questions we want to be asking as to how they define or how we define opportunity, and how we should be characterizing these areas, whether not just in terms of nomenclature, but in terms of concept as well.
Okay, another comment. As low income and minority populations are more dispersed, may want to consider looking at smaller geographies rather than census tracts.
Thank you. That's a good suggestion. When one of the issues I see with that is when communities of concern are eventually used for grant programs, then you need to determine what are the areas where you prioritize these investments, and that's where it starts getting tricky, where you need to maintain a balance between an appropriate size of geography versus capturing the more dispersed population that you suggest.
Okay, great. A question from Fran. Smaller neighborhoods, have you ever come out to present to them? How do you actually reach out to them besides via big investors that would benefit from your analysis or recommendations? So basically, do you use smaller neighborhood groups?
So we do have we do have a network of community-based organizations that we maintain relationships with, and they help organize focus groups for us, typically with underserved populations, and so we engage with them. I'm not sure if there are any. I'm not sure what the big investors you are referring to.
Okay. Thank you. Josh has a comment. To the extent that the goal of RENA and Plan Bay Area itself is to facilitate more affordable housing and access to opportunity in high resource areas, for example, more dispersal of low-income households around the region, it seems moving to more of a performance-based equity analysis on policy investments, for example, who benefits and who burdens, would be more productive toward desired equity outcomes than a strictly place-based screen, especially considering that the COC framework ignores the countless low-income and person of color households that live outside of the limited COCs that may only have slightly higher concentrations. Equity is about people more than places.
For sure. Thank you, Joshua.
Okay, do we have any more comments?
I think that comment may actually transition as well into the next section. Because yes, definitely understand that equity is about people and not places. There's the issue is always going to come up when we talk about prioritizing investments as to where these investments goes. But yes, certainly there are multiple investments and policies that are not catered, that are not place-based, but people-based. And so as I have mentioned previously, we are starting on the equity analysis report for the plan. And I want to share with you a quick overview of how we would present this equity analysis report, and are seeking your comments. On the next page, please. The report will have three main sections. One is the equity lens on strategies. Second is the investment analysis, which analyzes all the investments that are going into the plan, or that the plan is recommending. And third is the plan outcomes analysis. And of course, the disparities that we show for the investment outcomes or the plan outcomes will be based on, as I mentioned earlier, not just communities of concern, but also showing it for high resource areas to show the disparities between both concentrated affluence as well as concentrated poverty and other disadvantages. And where possible, we will also show disparities on the basis of income group, which captures that what we were talking about, the distinction between people versus place when it comes to equity. So the first section is the equity lens on strategies. As I mentioned previously, in this plan, we really have taken an equity and justice lens approach and tried to weave equity into all the strategies and refine them multiple times. And there are various strategy components that cannot be simulated in our models. For example, youth fare discounts or subsidies for internet access or higher subsidies for building retrofits for households with low income. Such benefits would not be reflected in the metrics in our plan outcomes. And so this section would seek to highlight all these components. And specific to transportation projects, we will also highlight the commitments that various transportation project sponsors have made towards equity-focused policies along with their projects. Second, we will have the investment analysis. Next slide, please. We will have the investment analysis that measures the distribution of planned funding across the 4 elements of the plan towards underserved populations. There was a version of this in the draft blueprint outcomes document, which was your attachment 4. So this section will attempt to capture who the funding in the plan would directly or indirectly benefit. And for transportation, this will be based on how people currently use different transit systems or the road system. And so this will also include the mandatory Title VI analysis on transit investments. For housing, we would show where the housing production is focused based on geography type, that is between communities of concern or between high resource areas and the rest of the region. For economy, we would be going over how the various investments, whether for universal basic income or subsidies for internet access or training programs, how that translates into what that means for low-income household. And then finally, for resilience investments, we would also show how that gets distributed, not just on the basis of geography, but also based on households of different income groups, based on the different subsidy rates that might be provided for those building retrofit investments, for example. Third, the third section would be the outcomes analysis, which will measure disparities in plan outcomes based on metrics. So now this builds on metrics that were developed during Plan Barrier 2040 and Horizon, although we have actually expanded that quite a bit, and you probably would have seen that in the attachment 4. We will also look to calculate disparities between population groups for existing a 2050 no project scenario, which is a 2050 where there's no implementation of our draft plan, and then of course 2050 draft plan, highlighting where the plan is able to decrease disparities. So this will also inform the mandated EJ environmental justice analysis we are required to do for the plan. Now, the table to the right shows the topics for which we would measure disparities. We align these metrics to our guiding principles, and more specifically for 2 key outcomes that align within those guiding principles. So that more details on that are in attachment 4. Next page, please. So to wrap up, before we open for more questions and discussion, here's what you can expect in the next few months. In November, we are kicking off our, next page, please. In November, we are kicking off our implementation plan engagement, which will happen alongside the final blueprint analysis. So the implementation plan is where we identify specific near-term actions within the 1 to 5 year timeframe to put all our Plan B area strategies into action. So these workshops are next week. We have 2 workshops, one for transportation environment and one for housing and economy. Originally, we had planned to have a regional equity working group workshop as well, but given these are so topic area focused, as in focused on the element of the plan, we decided to just have these 2 workshops. Most of you should have already gotten an invitation, but if you'd like to attend, you can email me or Ursula. There are a few spots still open. In December, we will release the final blueprint outcomes, after which we will be seeking approval from our boards to approve the final blueprint as the draft plan. So we encourage you to attend the planning committee meetings, which is where we will be sharing all the outcomes, including metrics from the final blueprint. After this, we would begin the EIR phase and the drafting of plan documents and reports, including this equity analysis report. And in February, we hope to share a draft of the report with you, along with a revised nomenclature for communities of concern and also more details on the demographics and outcomes in these communities. In April, we would release a draft plan as well as the Title VI and EJ analysis. With that, I would like to open it again for any questions and discussion. We would be happy to hear your thoughts on the framework for our report, any feedback on the presentation of the plan outcomes and disparities from the draft blueprint in the attachment 4, any comments on metrics, on how we should be showing these outcomes. We would welcome any feedback right now, and also any questions on next steps. So first, let's see if there are any questions in the Q&A box, and then we can also call on people.
Yeah, that sounds good, Anoop. So right now, yeah, if you want to type in your questions, we're happy to answer them or raise your hand. And we actually have a question from Rich. So Rich, unmute yourself and please ask your question.
This question's, this segment sort of answered my original questions on how do we get there with all the expenses that we have here in the Bay Area. Basic annual income, which I'm sure everyone knows that was an idea out of the conservative economic school of the University of Chicago with Milton Friedman back in the 70s to do a basic annual income. And one of the ways we may get there is with all of the artificial intelligence coming, which is going to displace millions of people, especially at the lower skilled levels, that we may have to do a surtax on the companies that not only use artificial intelligence to displace people, but those that develop it and manufacture it. Just one idea, but I think that's a great idea, and I think it'll go a long ways to developing more equity in our area, and also watching what happens with the attempt at that in Stockton, especially with the changes there during the election. Again, thank you very much for letting me ask this question and throw out an idea.
Thank you, Rich.
Thanks, Rich. Okay, please again, type in your questions in the Q&A box or raise your hand. If you have any comments for us or questions. Here comes a question. As far as the investment analysis, could you differentiate investments coming from funding pots that MTC controls / are fairly certain versus more abstract investments?
Sure. We will be showing like the sources of our investments as well.
Okay. Give it a few more. Okay, here's from Kate. On the slide regarding equity lens, maybe Keenam, if you could go back to that, capturing all strategy refinements that advance equity, please clarify whether the equity lens will include those with disabilities, the elderly, and youth.
Yeah, so sorry, one second. So when I mentioned the slide, it's not an approach that we are starting to take. This is really what we have done over the last year in terms of refining strategies, and some of our strategies do call out prioritizations for people with disabilities or the elderly and the youth, and so that's what this section will highlight. Yes, but do note that we know that our strategies don't go enough into spelling out what investments are required specifically for the elderly and people with disabilities, but there is another plan that is meant specifically for that, and we coordinate with that plan. It's called the Coordinated Human Services I'm forgetting the full name. But that's the plan, and it kicks off next year, and will be released in 2022. But we will be coordinating with that plan.
Yes, and that's updated every few years. We call it the coordinated plan for short. Yes, we've been doing it for many years. Yeah. Okay, any other questions or comments? Okay, well, Anoop, why don't you wrap us up?
Okay. Again, we wish we could be in person to have a more lively discussion here. But we will record all your comments, and I know some of them will be applicable for the longer term as well when we engage in this process of trying to overhaul the communities of concern framework. But until then, we will continue working on the final blueprint analysis and share outcomes next month. And we will come back to you around the February timeline to share an update on the equity report itself. So again, thank you for your continued engagement. We really appreciate it. And that's all. Have a nice day. Bye.